Hello everyone, and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The hospital corridor smelled like bleach and burnt coffee. Finn stood stopped outside the ICU, his white coat half-buttoned, and the stethoscope still hung around his neck like a rope that he couldn't decide whether to tighten. Steffi had texted him 20 minutes earlier. Come now. Something has happened to Dylan. He had expected another overdose, another relapse, and another round of the same weary story. He was not prepared for this. The automatic doors groaned open, revealing Dylan, thin but clean, sitting upright in the bed, and 4 lines running into the crook of his arm. His eyes, the same stormy gray Finn saw in the mirror every morning, fixed on him the instant he crossed the doorway. "You came," Dylan rasped. His speech sounded like gravel poured on glass. "Of course I came," Finn said automatically, doctor mode taking over despite the fact that his legs were suddenly unreliable. Steffi said, "I told her not to sugarcoat it." Dylan's fingers rubbed the edge of the thin hospital blanket. "I needed you to hear it from me." Finn drew the plastic chair closer and sat, attempting to read the monitors the way he normally did. Steady sinus rhythm. Oxygen saturation 96%, blood pressure trending down from the Ativan they'd given him to halt the trembling. He comprehended all the numbers. He did not know what was going to happen next. Dylan took a breath that appeared to cost him everything. "You're my brother, Finn." The room shook. Finn's gut lurched as he was called to a code where he knew the patient would not live. "Dylan, you are fatigued. You have gone through." "No." Dylan's hand reached out, bony fingers wrapping around Finn's wrist with unexpected force. "Full brother. Same mother and father. I got the paperwork. I've had them for several years." Finn looked at the hand on his arm and said, "I just couldn't." The nails were chewed down, the cuticles were rough, and small tracks appeared between the veins. A stranger's hand, yet it wasn't. He recognized the shape of the knuckles, the curve of the thumb, and the slight scar across the second metacarpal from childhood images of himself. His voice came out smaller than he desired. "That's not possible." "It is." Dylan's laughter broke in the middle. "Mom, our mother, was 17 when she had me. Dad, John Finnegan, was 19 and home on break from medical school. They were not married yet. We weren't even really together. She silently gave up on me, ended the adoption, and moved on. We met a few years later, married Dad for real, and had you." "Perfect little family," he said, releasing Finn's wrist and falling back against the pillow, his eyes too bright. "I grew up knowing that I had a sibling out there. It took me 29 years, 3 rehab stays, and 1 very costly private investigator to find you." Finn's pager vibrated against his hip. He ignored it. "Why now?" "Because I am dying, Finn," Dylan stated bluntly, as if he were ordering pizza. "It's a liver shot. Hepatitis accomplished what heroin failed to do. I have months, maybe fewer. And I didn't want to die without at least looking the guy in the eye who gave me the life I was intended to live." The pager rang again, insistent. Finn hushed it without looking. His throat felt like it was lined with sand. "You could have called. Written." Dylan twisted his mouth as he said, "I tried once. I left a message at your old practice in Santa Monica. Whoever replied said Dr. Finnegan does not accept unsolicited family news, or something like that. I assumed you knew and didn't want me." "I didn't know." The words came out harsh. "I would never." "Yeah, well." Dylan shrugged, then coughed. When it was over, he wiped his head and turned to the bedside table. Top drawer. Envelope. "Read it when you are ready. Birth certificates, adoption decrees, and DNA tests." Finn's hand hovered before pulling back. Not yet. He couldn't touch it yet. Instead, he posed the only question that mattered at that moment. "Is Mom aware you found me?" Dylan shook his head. "I did not want to be the ghost who ruined her second son's lovely existence. I figured I would inform you first. Let you decide if she ever knows I existed." The stillness lasted until the heart monitor's bleep grew deafening. Finn gulped hard. "You're not a ghost, Dylan. And my life is not flawless. But you are here now. That matters. Dylan's eyes widened, and for the first time, he appeared 20 years younger, like the brother Finn had never realized he was missing. I didn't come here to ask for a kidney, money, or anything. I just needed to say it once. Finn stretched out to cover Dylan's icy hand with his own. Yeah, he said, his voice breaking at the word. I am. Across town in the Forrester mansion, a different type of bomb was going off. Ridge stood in the living room, his face pale, the phone still clenched in his palm, as if it had burned him. Brooke hovered nearby, twisting a tissue into a knot. Eric sat in his wingback recliner, gazing back on his 90-plus years. Thomas stood near the fireplace, arms crossed and jaw squeezed so hard it trembled. Say something, Ridge eventually muttered. Thomas's laugh was unpleasant. Dad, what do you want me to say? That I am sorry Paris has died? I am. I'm sorry, but security tape shows me arguing with her an hour before she jumped off the cliff. I am that as well. But I didn't push her. You were the last person to see her alive, Brooke said softly. No, Thomas snapped. The person who killed her was the last person who saw her alive. And it wasn't me, Eric said quietly but forcefully. Thomas, the police are on their way. They have a warrant. For what? Thomas threw his hands up. To jail me because Paris and I fought? She was inebriated, Dad. She screamed at me about Hope, the baby, and how I had ruined her life. I told her to go. She stormed out. Ridge took a step forward with crazy eyes. Thomas, why did she die at the bottom of Mulholland? Why is your DNA beneath her fingernails? Because she slapped me? Thomas yelled, ripping open his shirt collar to display 4 livid scratches on his throat. Look. She went crazy. I grabbed her wrists and stopped her. She backed away and ran out crying. I assumed she'd call a rideshare and sleep it off at her sister's. I didn't realize, his voice cracked. He turned aside, his shoulders shaking. Brooke came to Ridge's side, placing her hand on his arm. We need to call Leslie. Right now. She's the best criminal attorney in the state. She won't arrive before the cops do, Eric answered firmly. We'll ride this out together. As a family, Thomas responded. I'm not going to prison for something I didn't do. No one responded. The doorbell rang with 3 harsh chimes that sounded like a death knell. Ridge strode to the entryway like he was about to be executed. When he opened the door, he saw 2 detectives standing there, one with a warrant and the other holding cuffs. Thomas Forrester. The older detective remarked, his voice flat from tiredness. You've been arrested for the murder of Paris Buckingham. The shackles clicked shut before Thomas could react. He gave a brief glance back as they escorted him out. His gaze met his father's, imploring, indignant, and afraid all at once. Ridge's legs gave out. He collapsed to the marble floor, a strange sound coming from his chest. Brooke slid beside him, arms around his shoulders, both of them trembling as red and blue lights illuminated the windows and Thomas vanished into the back of a police cruiser. In the hospital, Finn eventually opened the packet. The birth certificate was old, with soft edges and fading ink, but it was undeniable. Mother, Lee Finnegan. Father, John Finnegan. Dylan Jack Finnegan was born 7 years, 3 months, and 12 days before John Finnegan Jr., Finn. The DNA report was crisp, new, and harsh in its certainty, a 99.9997% chance of full sibling relationships. He waited there until the night shift nurses changed. Dylan fell asleep fitfully, and the machine's constant beep became the only sound in the room. Then he took out his phone and started a new message to his mom. We need to talk. In person. Tomorrow. He paused for a long time before sending the message. Outside the window, Los Angeles continued to spin. Headlines already shouting about Thomas Forrester's arrest, gossip sites exploding with Paris' awful end, and journalists swarming the Forrester gate. But within the small ICU room, a new story was just beginning. Finn pressed his face against the cool glass, whispering to the reflection that he now had a sibling he'd never met. What the hell are we doing now? The city did not respond. Brothers, secrets, anguish, and guilt. They all waited for the dawn, just like always. However, nothing would ever be the same again. Finn had always assumed that his life, as convoluted as it was, had finally reached a state of relative stability. After years of mental turmoil, secrets, and betrayals, he had gotten accustomed to live in a world where the earth may shift unexpectedly. But nothing, not even the hardest moments with Sheila, prepared him for the moment Dylan looked him in the eyes and said the words that ripped his life apart. "You're my brother." There were some lines a man expected to hear in his life, statements of love, grief, and anger, but this was not one of them. The phrase appeared to reverberate in Finn's mind long after Dylan's lips had stopped moving, vibrating like a shockwave. For a second, he wondered if he'd misheard, if the stress of recent weeks had warped sound into forms that didn't make sense, but Dylan wasn't laughing, wasn't backtracking, and wasn't giving any sign that this was a mistake. He stood there, solid, steady, and serious, waiting for Finn to process a truth that he had clearly borne for far too long. Finn's breath caught in his throat, and he looked to Dylan's gaze for confirmation that this was true. Dylan had always been a mysterious figure, someone who appeared unexpectedly and seemed to know more than he should. Finn couldn't explain the uncanny familiarity that had existed between them when they first met. With those 3 earth-shattering words hanging in the air, everything fell into place. But disbelief was not something he could dismiss easily. "What are you talking about?" Finn inquired, his voice alternating between amazement and defensiveness. "How could that be true?" "My family, my parents." Dylan shook his head gently and almost mournfully. "Those who reared you are your family. Nothing alters that." "Finn, I am your biological brother. I had known for months. I tried to tell you previously, but everything was too shaky. You were coping with Sheila, Steffi, and attempting to restore your life. I didn't want to aggravate the situation." Finn's stomach turned when he heard Sheila's name. He had desperately hoped that the gloomy cloud she had cast over his life would eventually lift, but fate seemed determined to keep dragging her into the center of everything. "Is it because of her?" Finn asked, scarcely able to speak. "Is she somehow connected to you? Because if she is, no." Dylan interrupted him off abruptly. "Sheila had nothing to do with it. You and I are related through our father. Not her." Finn's heart pounded so hard that it shook his entire body. A brother. He didn't know his father. He had lost another layer of his identity. "Why now?" he whispered. "Why inform me at all?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," Dylan replied softly. "Because secrets harm people on this planet, and I swore I would never let someone I care about be as surprised as I was." Finn gulped hard, emotion burning in his eyes. "I want you to know you're not alone, no matter what happens." For all the upheaval those words caused, there was something unquestionably grounded about them. A brother. He never realized he had such a strong connection. However, the revelation also implied that nothing in his life was as stable as he had previously imagined. History had taught him that such realities were rarely single events. Rather, they occurred in clusters, causing a domino effect that brought everything crumbling down. While his life was shattered, Ridge Forrester's world was shattered even more severely across town. He had always assumed he had been through every conceivable tragedy, betrayals, deaths, deceit, and losses. But nothing prepared him for the moment the police officer strode into the room, his demeanor somber, his voice thick with a tone that hinted of impending disaster. The officer cleared his throat. Mr. Ridge's heart plummeted as Forrester informed him of new information regarding Paris Buckingham. Paris had been AWOL for several days, far too long for anyone to pretend everything was okay. Ridge had attempted to hang on to hope, but hope was frail at best and delusional at worst. Still, nothing could have prepared him for the following sentence. The cop breathed. "We have reason to believe she was killed. Abducted." The word exploded like a bomb in Ridge's chest. He felt it rip through him, stealing his air, his composure, and his balance. But the horror did not stop there. And the evidence we've uncovered points to Thomas Forrester as the primary suspect. Ridge staggered backward, as if struck. His mind went blank for a moment before exploding with protestations, denials, and desperate attempts to reconcile the impossible.
No.
No, Thomas would never injure Paris. He loved her. He was preparing a future with her. You can't just stroll in here and accuse my son of murder, the cop said calmly. We're not accusing him, Mr. Forrester. We are presenting the evidence. And right now, everything points in his direction. Ridge felt the floor beneath him shift, as if the cosmos itself was falling under the weight of those words.
His son.
It's his boy. The boy he raised, the man he defended despite every misstep, questionable decision, and dark impulse he desperately wanted to think Thomas had conquered. This couldn't be true.
It would not be.
But the officer was not done. There was evidence of a struggle. Fingerprints. Ridge's voice trembled as he recounted witnessing Thomas and Paris arguing the night she went missing. He struggled, yeah. He committed mistakes.
But murder?
That is not who he is. The officer paused before speaking calmly and definitively. We have sufficient evidence to bring him in for questioning. And, Mr. Forrester, I'm sorry, but the case is currently being investigated as a homicide. Ridge dropped into the nearest chair, hiding his face in his hands as his world shattered. Every breath felt like a jagged piece of glass cutting through his lungs. He wanted to scream, anger, and deny everything, but the room was spinning, his chest tightened, and all he could muster was a broken, murmured plea. No, not my son. Not Thomas. The cop took a courteous step back, giving Ridge some room, but the damage had already been done. Ridge's mind replayed every time he tried to steer Thomas, every time he worried his son was slipping back into old patterns he pretended were gone for good. He had sorely wanted to trust in Thomas's redemption. Ridge felt his heart crack as he considered the prospect that his darkest worry concerning his son was true. Across Los Angeles, two families' lives were being reshaped by unexpected facts. Finn struggled with the discovery of a sibling he had never known existed, a revelation that upended everything he knew about his background. Ridge experienced the nightmare of losing his son, not to scandal or heartache, but to a crime so serious that it ripped apart everything he loved. But if there was one thing the Forresters and those around them understood for certain, it was that secrets rarely existed alone. They branched, intermingled, and led to deeper truths that no one could predict. In the shadow of these two life-altering insights, further riddles began to emerge. Finn's mind raced as he attempted to digest Dylan's confession. He wanted to know everything: how his presence had been concealed, why Dylan had waited so long, and what this meant for the family he assumed he knew. Half of him felt betrayed, but another half was strangely relieved. Growing up, he always felt that a piece of his identity was missing. Hearing the truth, however inexplicable, he felt a small part of that emptiness awaken with realization. Dylan kept a close eye on Finn, giving him space to take it all in. I know this is a lot, he added calmly. You don't have to accept it immediately. I didn't know when I initially learned about you. How did you find out? Finn inquired, his voice calmer but still weak. A letter, Dylan clarified. I was abandoned by my father. Your father, too. He never spoke a word while alive. He kept our lives separated. But he wanted us to know eventually. I suppose he hoped we'd meet. Finn clenched his jaw, his fury growing. He should have informed us himself. Dylan agreed, saying, he should have been a father to both of us. But he didn't. And now all we have to do is deal with the facts he left behind. Finn couldn't decide whether to shout or collapse. Everything felt too weighty, sudden, and overwhelming. But when he stared at Dylan, he saw the smallest spark of connection, a tie he hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. While Finn's world restructured, Ridge's continued to crumble. Brooke discovered him a little while later, still in shock, with the police officer gone, but the emotional debris spread around the room like broken glass. She dashed towards him, dread mounting as she saw his look. Ridge? What happened? She inquired, crouching beside him. Ridge raised his head, his face pale and smeared with tears he couldn't recall pouring. It's Thomas, he muttered. They think he killed Paris. Brooke felt blood run from her face. She knew Thomas's history, his darkest times, and Ridge's strong desire to believe Thomas had changed. The prospect of him being involved in something so heinous felt like a nightmare, but given their history, it wasn't completely unthinkable. "Oh my God," Brooke exclaimed. "Ridge, we don't know for sure." The police jumped to conclusions.
We have seen this happen before.
Ridge shook his head. Evidence may be misleading. They've got fingerprints, witnesses. They've got enough to bring him in. Brooke, what if I am wrong? What happens if I push too hard? What if I convince myself that he was fine when he wasn't? Brooke's heart yearned for him. Ridge always carried his family's load, as if it were his whole responsibility. She grabbed for his hand. "We'll find out the truth. No matter what it takes," Ridge said, his voice cracking with terror. "What happens if the truth destroys us?" Down the hall, unbeknownst to Ridge, Steffi stood motionless after overhearing a portion of the exchange. Her brother, her complicated, conflicted, fiercely loyal brother, being charged with murder was a blow she couldn't take. Her initial response was denial. "No," she whispered to herself. "Thomas would not do this. Not to Paris. Never." But then a terrible notion occurred. What if Thomas hadn't planned this? What if something happened accidentally? What if he panicked? Thomas has been fighting demons for years. Obsession, impulsivity, and emotional instability. Everyone hoped he had overcome them. But hope was not evidence. She clasped her hand to her mouth, her heart hammering. She needed answers. And she needed to locate Thomas before the cops did. As twilight fell over Los Angeles, two families, two very different lives, moved through the aftermath of disclosures neither of them were prepared to confront. Finn attempted to remain steady as he asked Dylan question after question, each answer revealing layers he had no idea existed. Ridge battled the terrible fear that the boy he had guarded so many times was now at the center of a tragedy too huge to ignore. Both were confronted with revelations that threatened to undermine all they believed. But, amid the pandemonium, one thing became clear. Secrets like this rarely surfaced on their own. They arrived with shadows, ramifications, and links that no one could predict. Finn's revelation about Dylan would cause him to reconsider his identity, family, and the stability he had worked so hard to establish. Ridge's sad news concerning Thomas would prompt inquiries, investigations, denials, and agonizing possibilities.